and former prosecutor into the conversation to talk about all of this. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
All right, so I do want to talk about the lawsuit in general. We heard there from the Attorney General for the District of Columbia, as well as Mayor Bowser of D.C., but there's a lot of information there. Can you break down exactly what D.C. is arguing here in that lawsuit against the Trump administration?
Right. So the argument from D.C., from its Attorney General, is that this was unconstitutional. It's an inappropriate application of an emergency provision in the D.C. Home Rule laws. In other words, D.C. is saying there's no emergency here. It's an overreach by the federal government to try this takeover of the police department. And the D.C. did get a slight victory when the judge in the case ordered that the chief of police for the district remains in place. Underlying this is a bunch of negotiation that's going on. I mean, generally, it seems like the federal government and the mayor have had a pretty decent relationship up to this point in terms of cooperation. But now the effort by the federal government to increase its presence and to allow federal officers and National Guard to be enforcing the laws of D.C., it's resulted in this clash. And so it's ongoing. The victory for D.C. was a small one, but it did leave the chief of police in place, and the federal government still wants to have the ability to control the federal officers to work with the Metropolitan Police Department to make D.C. a safer place.
When we talk about going forward, you kind of touched on this there, but what are the next steps here? What happens next overall?
Well, the judge in this case has been urging both sides to sit down and negotiate to try to get to some agreement. The judge has hinted that she may rule in favor of the district in terms of overturning the power of the federal government to impose its so-called emergency powers on the district in terms of law enforcement, patrolling, things like that. So the judge has said, she's telegraphed a little bit, saying, I may come back and issue a ruling that's not favorable to the federal government. So sit down and try to work something out. And the fact that she's allowing the DC chief of police to stay in place is certainly a sign of where she may be going.
Do you expect we could potentially see this go all the way up to the Supreme Court at some point? Again, there's several steps that could happen.
Yeah, it certainly could. It certainly could go that far. I mean, these are issues that are going to be relevant not only to DC, and it's a very specific situation because DC is essentially a federal city, but any efforts to replicate this in other cities around the country will be facing some of the same challenges. So yes, very likely that the matter is going to be in front of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Do we know if federal agents there possess kind of the same maybe arrest powers as DC police, especially when you're talking about maybe some minor offenses?
Right. It's an interesting situation. Generally, up to this point, federal law enforcement agents could enforce federal laws as it related to federal property in D.C. and federal crimes. That's always been on the books. And there is a provision in the D.C. statutes, in the district statutes, that say if there's a cooperation agreement between the district and federal law enforcement, then the federal agents can be enforcing D.C. laws, including up to misdemeanors and felonies in the district. But it depends on, the language seems to depend on whether there's a cooperation agreement. One of the issues may be, does this emergency order from the federal government stand in place of a cooperation agreement? So right now, it looks like federal agents can enforce local laws with the cooperation and the approval of the Metropolitan Police Department, for example. But again, this is going to be one of those issues that is going to be tested. And I think as the days go by, we're going to see that issue arising as the federal law enforcement agents are engaged more and more in patrolling in D.C.
Kind of a weird question here, but I want to get your take. What is it that the average American, maybe, whether they live in Washington, D.C. or somewhere else across the country, why is it important for them to maybe pay attention as all of this is unfolding?
Well, that's a very good point. And one of the issues is, first of all, not everybody in D.C. is opposed to this surge of federal law enforcement. A lot of people are saying, obviously, we feel safer having this in our community. But this does raise issues about whether this is going to be replicated in other cities that the federal government deems dangerous, high crime cities, things like that. So you may be watching how the D.C. situation unfolds, but if you live in an urban area where there has been a perception or reality of significant increases in crime, this may be an issue that's coming to your doorstep pretty soon. So keeping an eye on how it plays out in DC, even though it's a little bit different because it's a federal city, how it plays out here could have a lot of impact on people elsewhere.
All right, John Day, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and help to break it all down. Anything else you want to add? Anything we missed here before I let you go?
No, it's just it's a fascinating clash of the local DC, which remember they're a federal city. They don't have the formal senators and representatives that every other state in the country does. And so the rules are different for DC, but they may be applicable down the road to the rest of the country.
Yeah, we'll definitely see how it all plays out. Thank you again for taking the time to join us on this Saturday. We appreciate it.